Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So for those that don't know, AutoFPS, a tool that dynamically adjusts your graphic settings to hopefully get you better FPS, has now been updated to work with Flight Sim 2024. I had planned to make a video on this yesterday, but as you might be able to tell by my voice, I've been rather unwell. Not to worry though, Island Sim Pilot did a wonderful video and I'd encourage you to go and watch that and also chuck a sub his way if you haven't already. I'll leave a link to that and AutoFPS in the video description. Of course, download and use AutoFPS at your own risk. So in this video, I wanted to see if AutoFPS can help with my MSFS 2024 performance woes. Those of you that caught my 32 versus 64 gigabytes of RAM video might remember that while we could see the extra RAM being used, my main thread was so completely bogged down that we couldn't see a lot of benefit of that extra RAM. Now I'm running a 5800X3D with a 4080 Super alongside 64 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 CL18 memory, so you can imagine my disappointment to see such poor performance in our last video, but maybe AutoFPS can get us out of a jam here, so let's dive in. So we'll start here at Edinburgh. This is the version 2 of the Payware Edinburgh scenery from Pirigui in the Fenix A330. I'm running at 4K with TAA using my preferred graphics settings. I'll run those across the screen now, but pretty much ultra tuned down a bit. So let's get some baseline data. This is without AutoFPS running. We'll begin our takeoff roll here, and yeah, you can see it's not exactly great. Into the low 20s we go as we roll down the runway. But notice how once we get airborne, things do start to recover quite nicely. So perhaps AutoFPS can help us out by lowering settings, primarily the terrain level of detail while we're on the ground and the sim is obviously struggling. Then once we're up and away and the pressure's off, maybe then it can start allowing settings to crank back up again. So with AutoFPS running targeting 35 FPS, you can see that we're getting more of a 30 FPS experience here as we roll down the runway. Maybe we're seeing a flicker of 29 FPS there, but overall I would say this is a nice improvement. I know we're only just above 30 FPS, but given where we were previously, I'll definitely take this. Note how when we're on the ground, it's setting a terrain level of detail of 75 to try and keep those frames up. Then once we get airborne and the sim can start to relax a bit, it dynamically adjusts the terrain level of detail back up. Over to the default version of JFK in the A330 without AutoFPS running, you can see that we're having a bit of a rough time here as we barrel along the runway. This is definitely a mid-20s experience here, which isn't ideal. Then, as before, as we start to pull away from the airport, the FPS does start to recover. I did think as we are kind of heading towards Manhattan here, it might continue to struggle, but it seems the nearer we get to Manhattan, the better things get for us. So there's definitely something about being on the ground at airports that's causing us a lot of trouble. If we then enable AutoFPS, targeting 35 FPS, you can see, like in Edinburgh, it drops the terrain level of detail down to 75, and while the FPS is better than before, it's still not brilliant, barely getting to 30 FPS, with a lot of high 20s thrown in there. Again, as we get clear of the airport, it does start to recover. Now, in AutoFPS, if we enable the expert settings, you can see how we get a few more settings that we can dial in. So now we can say to drop the terrain level of detail to 50, for example, and let it adjust the cloud quality, among other things. So let's give it another run with those settings. And even with a terrain level of detail of 50, we're having a hard time here, again, due to being main thread limited, i.e. CPU limited. I'm sure some of you might be thinking, well, it's because you're running at 4K, but it's actually not. That would present itself as us being GPU limited, which we aren't. And just to prove that point, here's another takeoff roll at 1080p. Pretty much the same thing with AutoFPS running, those frames are not great. And to further prove the point, here's 1080p on the low end preset. I mean, yes, okay, it is a little bit better in terms of frames. I mean, it flipping ought to be. We're on the low end preset after all. But even at 1080p on the low end preset, on a 5800X3D, on a 4080 Super with 64 gigs of RAM, this is all we're getting. I've checked temperatures, I've checked frequencies, everything's fine. I've tried undervolting my CPU, I've tried running it stock, it doesn't seem to make a lot of difference. I've tried disabling the NVIDIA app, as I know that's doing the rounds at the moment, saying that that can impact performance. Again, no measurable differences. I've tried emptying my community folder, I've tried reinstalling the sim, I've tried verifying the integrity of my game files. I mean, short of reinstalling Windows, I'm kind of running out of ideas here. So I think it's fair to say that AutoFPS does help. I feel fundamentally stuck at the moment, as it doesn't seem to matter what I do. When I start running the planes I want to fly at the airports I want to fly out of, my performance tanks. Not everywhere in the sim, but I fly out of Edinburgh a lot, on my live streams in particular, and for me it's very important that it performs well. So I think for now I will probably continue to run AutoFPS just to help me kind of limp along. But longer term, I can't help but feel maybe a new CPU is on the cards. On which subject, if you are out there and you're running a 9800X3D, maybe even a 7800X3D, I'd be super keen to hear from you and to hear how you're getting on, because there's part of me that feels like the results here are just so bad that it must be badly optimized software, and perhaps throwing money and raw horsepower at the problem would only really be like a band-aid of a fix. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I'd love to hear from you, see how you're all getting on and what hardware you're running on. I hope this video has been useful. Leaving a like on the video really helps the video and the channel a ton, and also get subbed so you don't miss any future content. Thank you very much indeed for watching, folks. Look after yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, happy flying.